You look over your DM notes, looking at the NPC that you've created. You look at the description and see that he is midnight black. He is so black, there's no way you could see him at night. It would only be eyes and teeth. But you look at your group of players and you see several brown faces among them, and you yourself, the DM, are just a white guy. You need to give your players a description. One of them asks,
"What do they look like?"
Your eyes lower down to your sheet. Your lip quivers. What do you do? I'm Brewmaster Malcolm Burley, and today we're going to be covering a crucial topic in any fantasy role-playing game, and that is race. Now, it's been a running joke in the 5e community for some time that 5th edition lacks a certain mechanical support. DMs have been clamoring for years to get Wizards of the Coast to actually release tangible rules for essential roleplay elements in a fantasy setting. Did you say that the Lich's dragon had a certain type of poison in the fang? Yeah, I want to extract the poison from the Lich's dragon and make a potion out of it. Yeah. How does that take? What supplies do I need? I don't know. I want to begin constructing my secret hideout. How much money? I just want to do a heist. How long is it going to take me to dig the underground nearby? How do I go about that? Is there a place that I go to hire workers? So how do I go about that? Do I have to oversee the job?
My back is against the wall. This is not a test. It's the real deal. Help me! Help me! Nigga! Help me!
And after the game has already received such a streamlined treatment, many DMs, including myself, have been waiting for that mechanical support, and we're hoping that one D&D would be it. The 3rd edition was more like a very, very heavy stake. Rules on rules and feats on feats. And after chewing on that for some time, things were slimmed down and cut back. Until we have what we have now, which is 5th edition, which is more user-friendly and, of course, beginner-friendly. And for the surge of new players, it was perfect, or at least much more manageable than 3rd edition. But with that, simplicity sacrifices a lot of depth. And so I and others were expecting Wizards of the Coast to correct that oversight. But if what they've done with race is any indication of the trend of the other playtest material that they're going to be releasing, then I don't have faith at all that we're going to like what we will see. I almost got upset, but then I thought about it. This is clearly deliberate. Why do the designers want to scrub race from D&D? And I pondered about this and came to an interesting conclusion. One that I've been coming to when I look at all of the recent media that has been shoved in front of our faces. There's this ever-ending quest for the omission of anything that could be considered offensive or discriminating or bigoted. So in that sense, when you look at the fact that Wizards of the Coast is, well, a corporation, or at least they're owned by a corporation, and that their aim as a corporation is to make money, what makes the most sense for D&D is to simply appeal to as many people as possible, and they think that the method to critical acclaim is to offend the least amount of people. You look and you see it everywhere, all over Disney Plus, it's all over Netflix. Inclusivity is used as this corporate mask, and this mask is basically akin to blackface, all while charging hand over fist, selling representations of us back to us, all under the guise of inclusivity, right? But even within that, we see that it's done out of not a spirit of genuine inclusivity, but a spirit of fear. And what is everybody afraid of? Well, I guess the internet. The fact that everybody has a public voice, and you can just turn on the news and see the cops whooping people's asses left and right. It puts a spotlight on things, and it's ugly, and people want to shy away from it. People don't want to address it. They want to simply scrub it away. Let's not acknowledge it. Let's not even talk about the impact that it's had. But is that the correct method? Well, obviously I wouldn't be making this video if I thought that it was. So I'm here to instead equip you with some tips, some rules, some things that you can use at any table, even if you're just an average white dude. And while the topic of race may have Wizards of the Coast like,
Hey! Why are you running? Why are you running?
I'm here to tackle it head on because, hey, the shit don't scare me. And it shouldn't scare you either. So obviously the first thing that we have to do is ask the most basic and fundamental question. What is race? The Britannica Encyclopedia defines race as the idea that the human species is somehow divided into distinct groups on the basis of inherent physical and behavioral differences. And the practice or science of studying race theory was prominent in the 15 and 1600s, coming to full fruition between the 17 and the 1800s with race theorists like Buffon and Blumenbach. They believed that both Adam and Eve were white, and that as their descendants spread across the globe, the geographical conditions of the locations that they settled in eventually caused them to evolve into the certain races that they evolved into, that they begin to degenerate. And many English philosophers and scientists began to study race theory, which often had to do with the studying of the skull of different races. And by the 17 and 1800s, race theory was starting to become really popular, especially in the Americas, and would continue to grow in popularity, eventually even being incorporated by the likes of Charles Darwin, the father of evolution, and was used to the end of segregating people, keeping tabs on the populace, and also serving as a moral and ethical and even religious foundation upon which to justify racial discrimination, segregation, and slavery, especially at the time.
Obviously, Brewmaster Bentley could never hope to cover the entirety of the complex topic of race inside of 2 minutes of a single video, and so a lot has been missed or glossed over for the sake of time.
So now that we have an understanding of what race is and what it was intended for, we can obviously see certain problems that will arise if you try to apply this to real people in a real life setting. On the planet Earth, of course, there are differences. But are there different races? Are we all genetically different species from one another? No, that's not true. And that's why the term race, I don't actually agree with it in any way. Trying to attribute physical features to a certain race of people is inevitably something that happens when you quantify people by the way they look, or when you try to blanket apply features to everybody from a certain region, saying all Asian people can do kung fu, for instance, right? Saying that all black people can play basketball or run fast or jump high. And so many other different stereotypes can rise from that, no matter what race you are or ethnicity that you are. If you're in America, that comes with certain tags if you're identifying as that race. Because in America, we're trained to see race before we see anything else. And that does cause inherent problems socially and economically as well. Now, what does this have to do with D&D?
Not a damn thing.
While I understand that the racial politics of the real world makes sense for our real world, because no, we're not all different races. There's one race, the human race. Within that, there are obviously subsets of DNA types and genealogies, but we're not different races, because genetically, everybody can mingle with everybody. And so the only classification that there really is between us are the classifications that we put on ourselves. I will agree that it doesn't make sense to classify a black person from a white person from a Chinese person as literally being different species, different races. And what I can attest to are dwarves and elves and orcs being different species. It's a fantasy setting, and having many different races to choose from with their own cultures and ethnicities and backgrounds and lore gives the player so much to play with, and a mechanical weight should be felt behind this decision, which is something else that they removed from the lineages. The fact that I'm a dwarf doesn't affect my ability scores at all, or an elf, a halfling, or a tiefling. How could it not? They are literally different species from one another. Genetically, they're different, but then lore-wise, they might even literally be from different planes. And in instances like that, it makes absolute sense to have many different races. You say, we want you to not have to pick between 20 different versions of dwarf with all of these different abilities. We want you to have the freedom to create whatever you want. But in the same breath, you say you want to have a representation of the race that's just the dwarfiest dwarf. So you want me to have freedom to choose, but you want me to just make this one type of dwarf. It's conflicting, It makes me feel like this direction that they're going in is disingenuous because they are essentially taking away options and mechanical support. Now, sidebar. Let's say that I don't agree with the word race and they should change it to lineage, let's say, or heritages. That's a good word. And then that would apply mechanical bonuses to you. So let's say they do want to get rid of the word race, they could. And it would essentially change nothing about the game. And I understand why they're doing this. It is from a fear of offending anybody in the age of 2022. You can get canceled for a hot take gone wrong. But for me, this just takes away flavor from the game, reduces player options, and the tools for dungeon masters to build immersive worlds with lore and background and culture and heritage. They're afraid to create a game that may get canceled. But I'm telling you, you don't need to be afraid. I'm not afraid, and I'm going to teach you the tools that you need to represent race, culture, heritage properly at your table, and without having to reduce your game to that skim milk, watered down, milk toast dribble that is one D&D.
A simple statement of protest from an angry young geek.
And so now we get into the nitty-gritty, the mechanics and the techniques, what I personally do to represent race at my table, so that I can talk about anybody, anytime, anywhere, and not have to worry about stepping on any toes or seeing any faces wrinkle up. And the most vital technique, which is why I'm going to front load it, is obviously my favorite. Sleight of tongue. This is one of the most useful tools as a DM across the board. But when it comes to matters of race, it's especially useful because it allows you to essentially say what you want without offending anybody, because you won't ever say anything to offend anybody. So, without further ado, point number 1. Don't refer to race. Instead, refer to skin tone. Don't talk about the fact that somebody is Caucasian, African, Indian, Chinese, Japanese. There's no reason to be mentioning these real-world races in reference to people in a fantasy setting who literally could not ever be from Africa, even if they were really dark skinned. And so that's, of course, what you will say. When you're talking about an ethnicity that's not your own, simply describe the skin color. This preserves the sense of immersion at your table because you won't be referring to people or countries that don't exist within your campaign setting. But it also allows the person who's listening to fill in their own interpretation. So long as you're respectful with your analogy, you can even make an analogy. This is safe, this is fine. Skin, like almond. Skin, like mahogany. Dark skin, very dark skin. Tan skin, olive skin. This is a way that you describe the race of a person without actually just shouting out to your players what race they are. Paint a picture around what you're saying and let the other person fill in the blanks. The next point is, don't make foreigner accents. And this is how you know what is okay and what's not. If your accent is a variation of somebody of another country speaking your language poorly, like a broken Chinese accent or a broken Mexican accent,
Orale, Holmes. Yeah, I can do that. Okay, man. Nachos. Yeah.
A real racist with it, huh?
Yeah, that is extremely racist.
just don't do that. Use accents that are variations of your own native language. If you speak English, use a Scottish accent, Irish, Australian, Canadian. There are many different dialects to choose from. So sticking within the bounds of your language and doing variations of that language will keep you from stepping on toes. Nobody's going to be very offended from a native English speaker from America making a bad British accent, and vice versa. Nobody's going to be mad at a British DM for making a bad American accent. But making a broken Spanish accent or Chinese accent, that crosses into the territory of offensive. Y es igual si hablas español o otros idiomas. Stick within that language. Speak variations of that language, and that will keep you from invariably offending the different ethnicities that sit around your table.
But what if, for a completely legitimate reason, it's ultra important that a character has a foreigner's real-world accent?
In that situation, that is when it's okay to skip sleight of tongue and just hit it right on the head and say that. But then proceed to speak normally. So, huge Jamaican dude, right? You say he walks up, and when he comes into the light, you can see the huge frame, the dreaded hair, and the chocolate toned skin. And this is when you can just flat out tell your players, he's kind of got like a little bit of a Jamaican, like Islander accent. He says, "What are you doing here? And why are you trespassing on these lands?" And then you just move into the description, saying what the NPC says without making a bad ethnic accent with your voice. That could potentially be offensive to your players or people watching if you stream your games. The next most important thing to remember as a DM who's trying to portray different races and ethnicities is that stereotypes don't equal archetypes. Stereotype is a set of features and attributes attributed to a group of people based on popular reputation, word of mouth, and it has no basis in fact or reality for the most part. Archetype.
Definition: in fiction, archetypes are characters, symbols, or patterns that form a character type and are recognizable irrespective of their place, time of origin, or genre.
We have archetypes like the good cop, the bad cop. We have archetypes like the farm boy, the boy scout, the edgelord, the strong woman, fighter type. You got your jock type, you got your nerd type character, your scholarly characters, rage barbarian type characters. You got your playboy type character, your Great Gatsbys, your Han Solos, and Lando Calrissians. There are all these different archetypes that you can draw on, and you can use those for descriptions to give your characters more flavor rather than having to rely on whatever racial stereotypes you might want to rely on because you, in your head as the DM, know what race they are. Because again, racial stereotypes from our actual world have no place in the fantasy setting because those people aren't the same culture, the same ethnicity as the humans on planet Earth. So we want to instead refer to, of course, the archetypes, which are the different types of character, and they themselves do have different stereotypes and different attributes that are grouped together to create the archetype. And even the different classes within D&D have archetypes that are associated with them. It is very easy to flavor your NPCs without having to at all use stereotypes. So let's again apply this to our example. We see our tall guy walking toward us, comes into the light, dreaded hair, chocolate skin, speaks in an island accent and says, "What are you doing here?" And then this is where we get into the archetype. And now I'm going to say teeth adorn his costume. You can tell from the scars and the wildness of his hair and his eyes that he is only a moment away from rage. And the thickness of his muscles tell of a barbaric lifestyle. So now we have a Jamaican dude, basically like a barbarian type. And I gave all of that description without actually saying big, black, Jamaican. I never made any accents, Jamaican accents. And I didn't have to use any Jamaican stereotypes or black stereotypes in order to create an interesting picture or to at least give a hint of what his kind of vibe is.
Also possible, a player interprets the description of an Islander accent, dark skin, threats, and barbarism as something completely different than what you envisioned. This is fine as long as it doesn't impede the ability to play the game.
And again, because you're now describing character and not an assumed number of traits about him based on what he looks like, now we get into higher level DM stuff, which is taking this concept and being able to apply it to literally any NPC. And this is something that I like to do as a DM anyway, because when I can just describe the physical attributes and let the player come up with their own visual image of what they're actually looking at, it's much more powerful. And the players form more complete bonds with the NPCs, and they often look completely different than what I had imagined too, I find out. Now this last trick requires a little bit of work on your part, but it's easy to do. And it sometimes flies in the face of the immersion, which is what I was talking about before. So if containing the immersion is important to you, use this sparingly. But that would be to actually just refer to a real world actor or celebrity of the ethnicity that you're talking about. For instance, you can say, he's kind of like an older black man, bald, and you could say that as a white DM and that might make somebody cringe, because that person might prefer the term African American. You can't know that. I don't prefer the term black or African American, but you wouldn't know that if I didn't tell you. And so to avoid that minefield, you can just say, he looks like Samuel L. Jackson. That's your description, done right there. Everybody at the table will just nod and go,
I know exactly what you mean.
And it works the same with any other race. Pull back the assassin's hood and you can see the piercing eyes. Well, what does he look like? And then you just say, He's very similar to Donnie Yen. He's got basically the same facial features of Donnie Yen, except his skin tone is a little bit darker. Bam, description over. And this actually has a dual effect of making you look pretty damn cultured. And that will make your game in of itself feel more diverse, just because you, as the DM, are making more diverse references, bringing more diversity to your game. And that's why I said that part requires a little work, because that actually requires you as the DM being, well, more cultured. But of course, that is the major way that we all avoid racism. And that's just simply by exposing ourselves to each other. Showing that you are in the know about different races and what they watch and what they like will automatically help your table appeal more. And so now we say what we want to say, right? But without saying it. We come into a palace. We walk into the throne room and there's a prince. Now, in my mind, I see the prince as being sort of like Indian. That's the flavor. Obviously, it's not really India because it's in favor. So the players approach the throne and they are, of course, going to ask for a description, which I'll give them. And when I give them the description, I won't say he's an Indian guy wearing a turban. That might be what I'm actually picturing. But let's say I have my friend sitting at the table and he's Indian. And I don't know what I can and cannot say that's going to make him uncomfortable when it comes to talking about their culture, their race. And especially since I don't know a lot about it, the chances of me saying something that are going to be offensive are pretty damn high. So the way I would go about it is with my description, I would first say, you see him wearing the traditional garb of the Sultan of that land, being long and flowing robes and a headdress. I'm not going to say a turban, I'll just say a jeweled headdress. As you get closer, you can see better the face of the handsome prince. His almond brown skin and piercing eyes are framed by long flowing black locks. If I had to describe who he looked like, he looks like Shiva from BAAHUBALI. If you haven't seen BAAHUBALI, don't sleep on that movie. Don't you do it. And you can see how I can paint an entire picture without ever referring to the fact that he's Indian or saying he's wearing a turban. And you can still provoke basically the same imagery without having to literally say what it is, because it's directness typically that offends people. This works the same for any race, and I highly recommend that you do this for every race. Beast races, the goblinoids, everybody. Never refer to literally what they are. Never say there's an elf. You describe the pointed ears and you describe the skin color and all of that, but never use the word elf, because this is not about a racial classification. Sometimes you have to, for clarity's sake, but when it's not important, I won't say you see a halfling. I'll say you see a slight frame 2 feet tall. I won't say you see a quarter orc. I'll say there's a mountain of green muscle standing on the other side of the room, because that ignites the imagination of your players. And the way the 1D&D is going right now, where people are afraid to even use the word race, hopefully this video can help you keep all of the different beautiful diverse races alive and well in your game, so that your players have options, and so that you as the DM, regardless of what race your players play, human or otherwise, never feel out in left field when it comes to having to describe something on the spot.
Yeah, she's right over... Oh, she's not there.
Oh, that's okay. What did she look like?
She's...
But if you like what you heard here today and found any value from it, if you feel like anything that you got here today is going to elevate your game as a DM, or hell, even as a player, then be sure to tune in next time on Behind the Screen, where I'll be giving you all some tips and tricks and pointers on how to make your combat just that much sweeter, just a little iller. But until next time, I'm Brewmaster Bertley, and this is but one of my recipes. Take care of each other and be safe.
If you made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. Gracias por mirar. Como agradecimiento vengo con regalos. Your support is much more meaningful than you can ever know, and so these gifts are for you. At the end of every single video, I will give away free content for those who've watched all the way through. The content will often be themed after the video and can include anything from stat blocks for NPCs, monsters and villains, lore, magic items, random charts and roll tables, feats, items, spells, class features, abilities, and God knows what other homebrew. So make sure you check back every single episode to see what's new. If you want to support our show and help us increase our production value as well as the rate that we produce content, then please consider joining our Patreon. The link is in the description below, beneath the like button but above the subscribe button. And again, thank you so much for watching. Gracias por escuchar, and I'll see you in the next one.